Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my video for today regarding Amazon RDS. We're going to do a walkthrough on deploying a MySQL instance on Amazon RDS. RDS stands for Amazon Relational Database, Amazon Relational Database Service. And we say it's a web service that makes it easier to set up, operate, and scale a relational database in the cloud. And of course, what better place to get that definition than from Amazon themselves? Now, so we're going to go to Amazon RDS on AWS. We're going to log in and deploy an instance and walk through the several little bits of things you need to be aware of when doing that deployment. Before I do that, I'd just like to point out a few things. Why should we resort to this method of managing a database? You will agree with me that in these days of convergence, DevOps, and things, you may not always need a dedicated database administrator who has all the details of how to manage the database, needs to know about underlying files and all that, needs to be able to set up HADR. When you deploy your database on RDS, it's so much easier to get it working once and for all. It's so much easier to configure high availability and DR sites with the availability zones that Amazon provides. It's so much easier to scale, take backups, upgrades, and of course, in most parts of the world, for most organizations, I can tell you that Amazon will do a better job of securing your environment than you can do. While I say that, there is a caveat. You realize that when you're engaging cloud services providers, there is a border between the responsibility of the cloud service provider and your responsibility in terms of managing security. That said, to a large extent, a lot of the aspects of managing a database are made much easier if you deploy on RDS. So let's go over to our console, our AWS management console. When you log in, this is typically the landing page that you will see. And because I've visited some of the modules already, some of the services already, they are here in my recently visited services page. If that's not the case with you, you have to go up here, services, and then select the service you want. You can look for it in this long list, or simply type RDS and go to relational manage database service. All right, so I already have a database instance deployed, but we're going to walk through one deployment, and then I'm going to point out a few things I learned along the way, as well as things that are available in AWS documentation. Now, I can easily start from here, or I can check, first of all, what instances I have already deployed and determine I can manage my instances from here. But we're just going to create a new database instance. I don't need this right now. And I have to decide what kind of instance I want to create. Now, Amazon keeps advertising Aurora. Aurora is their variation of MySQL. And it's advertised as a more robust, a faster database based on testing. I've not tested it myself, but I'm sure I believe them. But today, we're just going to focus on MySQL. One of the reasons for that is you will find that it is a little less expensive than Aurora. You have the opportunity of deploying other kinds of databases on Aurora, on Amazon RDS, namely, I mentioned Aurora, MySQL, MariaDB, SQL Server, Oracle, and Postgres. Today, we're just going to focus on MySQL, the community version, and we determine what version do we want to deploy. I most often like to deploy the latest version. This is the version that is now owned by Oracle, basically. So this is what I want to do. Now, I decide what template do I want to do. I want to do production, dev test, and all that. I can, for the purpose of this demo, select the free tier option. I select the free tier option and I decide what will be my instance identifier. Let me call it eat fast or whatever. I mean, it's for an application called Eat Fast or Eat Food Delivery Service. Now I decide what do I want to be my master user. I can call it Eat Master User. It's always important to select credentials that you can easily relate to what you are using those credentials for. I'm just going to do a simple password. I'm not going to tell you what the password is. Simple password for my master database. Then I select the instance size. I select the instance size. And here I'll just, because I've selected free tier already, I've been given a T2 micro with 1 CPU and 1 gig of RAM. And all those selections are made to align with the fact that I have chosen not to pay for this instance. Now, every other setting, you typically would have it as default. And here, this is an interesting area, availability and durability. You can decide whether you want to deploy in a multi-availability zone deployment. What that means is that you want replicas of your database in other availability zone for the purpose of DR. Because I selected free tier, I don't have that available, but in your production environment, you may want to have that available. But it all depends on the kind of application you're deploying. If you're doing an application that is your recovery time objective and your recovery point objective allow you some level of lag or flexibility, maybe it's 1 day. What you can typically do is to rely on the snapshots, because the snapshot you can configure for daily or hourly, and you use that as your recovery strategy. That way you save money. So it's a balance between saving money and having the best availability setup. So that's for the multi-easy deployment. Now, connectivity or networking, in this case, I decide, which VPC do I want to deploy this? In Amazon AWS, when you say virtual private cloud, you're typically just saying my data center in the cloud. Your VPC defines the area that you have chosen to deploy resources, and that is equivalent to having a server room or a data center on premise. So your VPC is basically your data center in the cloud. I have created one already here, which I have specific settings which I have defined. So I'm going to use that, and I have additional configuration options for my connectivity. This is very important, and I will also highlight it more in the gotchas of this presentation. Now I have a number of subnet groups which determine how my instance will be deployed, how my instance will be accessible to me. I have a subnet group that is a database subnet group that is private. I have that which is public. I'm going to select the public. I'm going to show you in detail later on what this actually means. And then I'm going to decide, is my instance going to be publicly accessible? Because I want to demonstrate to you the accessibility from my Workbench, which is on my desktop. I'm going to select that option. Yes, I want it to be available. And then the security group where I will deploy this RDS instance, that's my security group is like something that defines my firewall, who defines who is going to be able to hit my instance and from wherever I decide. In a firewall, typically what you're saying is you're creating rules that determine source, target, and port numbers. Now, I have already done that with the security groups that I have, and I'm going to show you the definitions of the security groups as well. All right, so I'm selecting database servers as my security group for this deployment. So once you select it, you see this displayed there. I can decide that I want my instance in the availability groups that are available to these VPC. 2A, 2C, or just say, okay, anyone you like. And the AWS engine will deploy the database instance to any of the availability zones that are present in my configuration. All right, so this is authentication options. Do you want to use identity access management, or do you just want to use simple password to access the instance? I'll just select simple password. All right, more settings here. Now I want to decide. You remember what I have selected are the details for my instance. Now I'm going to select some details for my database itself. So I initially selected the options that had to do with the instance itself. I'm now going to deploy the select options that have to do with a database which will be deployed inside the instance. If you're familiar with the structure of MySQL, you remember that it's one instance, many databases architecture. So I just call my first database EatDB, okay? And all other things remain the same. Enable automatic backups. And I decided backup retention, backup window, no preference. I can select a window if I want. Let's say it starts at 1 a.m. UTC and duration for 3 hours. Okay. I can decide to enable different log reports. I'll just use the error report. And then finally, those are the key things. And I say, okay, go ahead, create database. At each point during the process, the status of my database creation is shown here. It will take a bit of time, so I'll use that time to show you a little more about the networking options that I chose. Now, subnet groups. I have 4 different subnet groups here, and each of them have certain definitions. The first one is the database subnet group. I'll show you the definition of that. This subnet group has 3 subnets in the 3 availability zones. And the CIDR blocks, the classless interdomain routing blocks, if you know a bit of networking, are 3. These are /24 IP addresses. That means that the first 3 octets define the network, and the last octet defines the host, 24 bits. The entire 4 octets is a total of 32 bits, yes? So when you say 24, that means the first 24 bits define the host, the network rather, while the last octet defines the, identifies the host. So in this case, we have 3 networks, 1, 2, and 3, and all 3 are part of these subnet group. Now, when you have a subnet that doesn't have access to the public internet as part of a subnet group, it is typically understood that that subnet group is a private subnet group. That means you don't expect anything sitting dependent on that subnet group to have access externally. So these 3 subnets are actually private subnets. I'll go back to the networking area and show you in detail what I mean by private subnets. Let's go back to the subnet groups, and then we have another one, which is the public database subnet group. This subnet group has another 3 different CIDR blocks, 0, 3, and 4. Remember I said the first 3 octets refer to the network, and the last octet refers to the host. So I have also 3 subnets here, but in this case, these subnets are actually public subnets. I will show you how that is defined in the networking section. So these are subnet groups. So you remember that when I chose my options, I chose the database subnet group public because I want this instance to be available on the public internet. So let's go over to EC2. And first of all, since we've started talking about subnets, I will show you the subnets that I have configured here. Now, where are you? Network and security, placement group, network interfaces. Okay, I have security groups here. So let's go to VPC. Sorry, my internet is a bit slow. I live in Africa. All right, so on VPC, I have my subnets. VPC, remember the VPC is your virtual private cloud, which essentially is the definition of your data center in the cloud. All right, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 subnets here. The first subnet, my backend subnet, I will show you. Let's modify this a bit. I'll show you how it's defined. So my subnet has a routing table that says that this is the destination. Yes, access control list determine how traffic happens with this subnet. All traffic allowed, all traffic allowed out. That's what's happening here. Let's look at that table. So that defined. My public subnet, on the other hand, has what you call an internet gateway defined in the routing table. An internet gateway allows this public subnet to have access to the internet. The same thing with the second public subnet also has this routing table associated with it. Then the third is also a public subnet and has this routing table associated with it. All private subnets do not have the internet gateway associated, defined in their routing table. That means they have no route to the external internet. So if I want my database subnet group must have the subnets that are defined as public subnet. That means the subnets that have an internet gateway associated with them. So that's what basically you've done. That's in terms of subnets, subnet groups, and then the database subnet groups that I've created. Now let's go up to something else. Network access control list. Typically, I have also done something here where I've defined rules that say if you that you allow traffic within these subnets, all traffic within these subnets, and then I have another control list that determines inbound rules, determines the similar routing rules. Now, in each of these cases, you have what you call the subnet association that determine which subnets are going to follow these rules. In the case of my VPC, which I have already defined, I mentioned earlier, I have 5 subnets that all follow these rules that I have defined here. I want to warn you that this is not perfectly defined. A network person will define it in more detail, or if you're working with a production environment, you want to be more granular in your definitions for the sake of security. Now see the subnets that are associated with this network access control list. So I've talked about subnets, I've talked about access control lists, and then I'm going to talk about security groups. Remember when I was configuring my database, I configured it with this security group, which is my database server security group. The definition of these database server security group is that allow everything that is coming from everywhere to talk to this this environment and on port 3306. Also, there's another rule that says allow this security group, this other security group, to talk to me on port 3306. 3306 is the default port for my SQL database instances. So you see that there are 3 aspects of networking, 3 or 4 aspects of networking that you have to pay attention to when configuring our database instances on RDS. Number 1, subnets and subnet groups. Number 2, network access control lists, which are associated with these subnets. And then number 3, security groups. So let's go back and see whether our instance is ready. All right, we'll go back and check up which of the instances are live. All right, so I have 2 instances out of 40 is my limit. And then finally, all right, so my instance is now available. It is now available. So what's going to happen is that I'm going to, I just noticed this update information. This is also important if you want to make sure your instance is using the latest TLS version. You should do this upgrade. So let's just take a look at the options we have taken. Remember, I have gone through the networking options with you. We just look through all the options we defined. This is what you call the endpoint. The endpoint is important. It's like the server name as it means to connect to the instance. Let's just try that out. This is the syntax. MySQL, then I specify the host, port number, username, and let's try that out in one of our, sorry about that. So let's try that out in one of our instances, our POTI environment. So because this server is, remember, we had 2 security groups, 2 key security groups for our RDS instance. We had one that allowed everybody to come in on port 3306. We had another one that allowed another security group to come in on port 3306. This server that I'm in is in that security group that is allowed. So that's why, from a networking point of view, so I put in my password and I'm in. So I do show databases. And this is the database that I created as part of the creation of this instance. It's DB. So I'm able to connect. The database is available. Now we're going to do something interesting. We're going to also try this from our Workbench instance. So let's look for Workbench and try a connection here. A connection, I'm sorry, just call it any name we want. This is it, DB connection. Then in this case, we're not going to use the full string. We're just going to need, all we need is the host name. So this is what we need here. Of course, it's actually the full string, but not specified in that way. This is a GUI, so we need we provide the host name here. In place of the actual host name, we provide the endpoint name. The port number is provided. The username is it master user. And then we provide a password. We can either provide the password straight or we wait for the prompt. So let's try it out. Test connection. When we do that, in this particular case, it spends a long time. Once it's doing that, you know that the connection is not going through. You have a network problem. Now I'm going to fix this network problem and then I'm going to come back to and explain why the network problem is happening. But first of all, let's get the error message. So it takes a while because it has to go through the timeout period. The timeout has to be elapsed, and then it finally returns the error that is that is a problem here. So wait for it. I'm going to try that again. I expect to get the error. Okay, let's just complete the connection and try the connection. We should get the error here. All right, so this is the error we get. Essentially, it says this is a connection error, this reason, whatever it is. I mean, a lot of stuff around the security. Now, when I escalated this to AWS, one of the diagnoses they gave me was that there may be something wrong with my client. Because as you can see, we've tested and we've seen that the database is available. We've seen that our configurations are correct. We've done all the networking configurations correctly, but we're still getting this. Now, one of the tests I did was to use another internet service provider to attempt this connection. So I'm going to just change my internet service provider. Let's do that here. I'm going to just switch and take softline off and connect here. Okay, so once I'm connected here, I'm going to try it again. Once I try it, let's see. Good, so I'm getting the password prompt now. So you can see that your problem can come from a variety of sources, but the truth is, once you see you are not able to establish a connection in reasonable time from outside the instance, most likely the problem you have is a network problem or security. Okay, once we're connected, we can see we'll be able to see our dashboard, our databases, and on schemas. Yeah, sorry. We can see the EAT DB, which we created, and so on. So we've been able to establish a connection successfully using a different internet connection than the one we originally started with. Okay, so let's switch back to our connection because it's better in terms of quality. So you may want to, when troubleshooting such complex issues, you may want to your internet service provider on the details. Now, let's look at a few other things that we need to be aware of before we round up this session. All right, sorry. All right, so key gotchas. We have talked about the networking configuration, looking at the security groups, the subnet groups, and of course, the network access control lists. We have also talked about endpoints versus hostname, which means when you are connecting to a MySQL instance on Amazon RDS, you should be using the endpoint, which represents your hostname. Now, finally, the point which I highlighted in this slide is start small, think big. If you are a startup or you are just experimenting, recall that I used the free tier option with a T2 micro, the smallest possible server type, to deploy this instance. You may want to do that because you want to start small and then control your costs and be able to grow gradually because it's easy to scale up in AWS. It's easy to even scale out if you want. But the point is, start with a small instance and then gradually grow it. So let's go and see a little bit about the cost on AWS dashboard itself. Sorry about that. Where are you? Okay. Sorry about that. Let's go back. Yeah. Okay, so our console, we can go in here and we'll be able to see our billing dashboard. We can tell how much is Amazon RDS actually costing us. So this is an interesting thing to look at. You can see if you decide to use Amazon, typically you will not be spending a lot if you manage your resources properly. And if we go to the breakdown, let's go to the breakdown for last month for us. We have this December now. Let's go to November. November, okay, nothing much. Yes, October. Out of $53, if we go to Relational Management Database Service, we find out that we are not spending any significant amount of money here, typically because we have been using, we are really running on free tier. We're not spending anything at all. For 700 hours plus, we spend nothing. So we see, compare that with the Linux T2 micro instance per hour, the on-demand instance per hour we did, and we're spending $24 in a month. So roughly, you can see that if you manage your deployments properly, you will not be spending much on Amazon at all. And if you grow your business you can work hard and grow your business over a period of 1 year, and then decide to scale up your instances to meet more demand. So let's go back to the RDS and see have a final view of any other thing I may want to point out before we close this session. All right. Yes, go back. Final view of this. Yeah, so we're looking at our settings. Security group, we're using the DW Server Security Group, and these are the settings. And we're using the subnet group, the public subnet group. Monitoring, are we using any monitoring? The logs we have an error log here. You can actually view your error log straight here if you in AWS RDS, and more details of the configuration using a T2 micro and so on and so forth. And finally, our backups are being taken. If you want, you can initiate the backup right away. Okay, thank you very much. These are actions you can also take: reboot. And if you want to modify this, you can do that. And some modification options require a reboot of the instance, and you can always do that. So we're going to stop here for now. In probably another session, if you want another session, please ask a question in the comments. Ask a question of what you want to know, what you want us to dive into deeper, what you want to clarify, any issues you're having. Put it in the comments section, and we'll get some of our experts to answer you. Thank you very much for spending time with us today. We've been talking about Amazon RDS, specifically MySQL community version. Thank you very much. Subscribe, share, comment. Yeah.